Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be continuing the human digestive system. So let's directly begin. So the human digestive system can be split into two parts. We have the alimentary canal, or we can call it the digestive tract, and we have accessory organs. So both of them joined together form what we call as the digestive system. So now let's look at the alimentary canal. So before we look at the organs that constitute the alimentary canal, the organs that constitute the alimentary canal, what distinguishes them from the accessory organs is that in the alimentary canal, food directly passes through them. However, for the accessory organs, they just help in digestion. How do they do that? They do that by secreting substances, although food does not pass directly through them. So in the alimentary canal, food directly passes through them, and the accessory organs, food does not directly pass through them. So if we're going to look at the digestive tract, this is just a big overview about it, and then we're going to be looking at the details later on in the video. So first, food starts in the mouth, and then it's transferred into the esophagus, and then the stomach, then the small intestine, and then the large intestine. And of course, we're going to excrete it through the anus. Now we look at the accessory organs. We have the pancreas, we have the liver, we have the gallbladder, and finally we have the salivary glands, which are found in the mouth. So first, let's look at the alimentary canal. So the first location 1, is we're going to start in the mouth. Now what happens in the mouth? We have two types of digestion, as we said before. If you didn't watch the first video, make sure to watch it. We have mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. Now both of those start at the mouth. So mechanical digestion is accomplished by the teeth. And what does it do? Remember, we said the mechanical digestion aids the chemical digestion. How? By increasing the surface area. So SA means surface area. That's how it increases the rate of chemical digestion. Now we said chemical digestion is the chemical breakdown using digestive enzymes. So we said in the mouth we have the salivary glands, which are an accessory organ. They secrete saliva, which is slightly alkaline, which means basic. Okay. Now what does saliva contain? Saliva contains water, mucus, usually for lubrication of the food, and we have an enzyme called amylase. Now this enzyme amylase, it breaks down starch into maltose, and that's our first form of chemical digestion. Now the product that we're going to have mixing water, mucus, and our enzyme amylase with the food that we digested, we're going to form something called a food bolus. Okay, it's like a ball, and now this ball is going to be transported from the mouth into the esophagus. But now watch out. Now you know how they say do not talk while you eat, because if we're going to look at it, I'm going to draw it slightly here. So if we have the esophagus here, and then another area we have the trachea. Now they're usually behind each other, but I can't draw it behind each other because you guys won't be able to see it. So we have the esophagus and we have the trachea for breathing. Okay, now and on top we have the pharynx, and here above the trachea we have the larynx, which is our voice cords. So now food is going to be going from the mouth to the esophagus. Now we have two mechanisms that prevent the food from coming into our trachea, which makes us choke. So some people choke when they talk while they eat because the food does not pass through the esophagus. Parts of it falls into the trachea, and then that's why we start coughing, because it irritates our trachea and we can't breathe anymore. So we have two mechanisms to stop that. So our soft palate is pushed upward to prevent the entry of food particles into the nasal cavity, so into our nose, and we have a small flap of muscle called the epiglottis. Now this epiglottis covers the larynx. As we said, the larynx is on top of the trachea, allowing the food to move from the pharynx to the esophagus directly. So if you want to think about it, you're going to have a flap like this, epiglottis. It's usually upward like this. That's why we breathe. However, when we eat, this closes, it covers the larynx, so food directly passes the food bolus, transports from this mouth into the esophagus, so pharynx, then the esophagus. Okay, now the food bolus reach the esophagus. Now this serves as a stimulus for what? For peristalsis to occur. So before we talk about peristalsis, let's talk about the structure of the esophagus. So the esophagus is what? The esophagus is a muscular tube lined with a mucous membrane. Now what's the mucous membrane? It has cells that secrete mucus for lubrication. So I drew here a small diagram of the esophagus. So the esophagus, smooth layer of muscles, okay? Those are all smooth muscles. Pay attention, it's smooth muscles, not skeletal muscles. And they have cells that secrete mucus that ease the movement of the food bolus. So if we don't have mucus for lubrication, there's going to be a lot of friction and the food bolus won't be able to move easily down. And now another contraction or another process that helps this food bolus, this is the food bolus, to move from the esophagus to the stomach, is called peristalsis. Now, what is peristalsis? Peristalsis is the repetitive, so pay attention, repetitive contraction and relaxation of the smooth muscles in the esophagus. And what stimulates peristalsis is the entry of the food bolus. So once the food bolus enters, this stimulates peristalsis, which is the contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles. Now, I want you guys to pay attention for this. I want you to think about it logically. So we have the food bolus here. I want to push it down. So I will contract on top of it. So contraction above the food bolus, and there will be a relaxation under it. Okay? So for it to pass, let me draw it again. So if I have a ball here, I want it to go down. I will contract those, so I will squeeze it. It's like I'm squeezing it. And of course, under it, I'm going to relax the muscles so it can easily pass through. So we will have contraction above the food bolus, and we're going to have relaxation under the food bolus. Okay? Perfect. Now we're going to pass from the esophagus into the stomach, as we have here in the image. However, as you guys can see, I added a small note, so there's something important you must know. So this is the esophagus. Before it reaches the stomach, we have a ring of muscle. So this ring of muscle, we call it a sphincter. It usually contracts or relaxes. So for the food to pass through into the stomach, we have a sphincter here called the lower esophageal sphincter, or they call it a cardiac sphincter. And it relaxes, which allows the food bolus to pass from the esophagus into the stomach. However, when the food bolus enters the stomach, this sphincter contracts. Why does it contract? And now we will even look into further detail why. Because the stomach has an acidic pH. And now we're going to be looking at why it has an acidic pH. So it has an acidic pH, and we don't want the acid that's in the stomach to go to our esophagus. If it does, what we will have something called acid reflux. So it's the sphincter contracts here. The cardiac sphincter contracts to prevent acid from going back up to the esophagus, and we call that acid reflux when this sphincter does not work. Okay, and now we look into further detail why the stomach has an acidic pH. So now we reach the stomach. Now the function of the stomach is mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. However, mainly what we chemically digest is proteins, and we will see why we said proteins mainly. So again, the usual, before we start about the function, we're going to talk about the structure of the stomach. So the outermost layer, I need to pay attention, outermost layer of the stomach is called the serosa, which is a thick connective tissue. It's usually for protection. And then after the serosa, we have a muscular layer. Now, the muscular layer has 3 types of muscles, but this is only in the stomach. And as we will see in the small intestine, we just have longitudinal and circular. However, in the stomach, we also have another layer called the oblique muscular layer. And those 3 layers help in mechanical digestion. And then after, we have a submucosal layer, but you're not responsible for it. And you have to know the innermost layer, which is mucosa, and same thing. It's a thick mucous membrane that contains glands. Okay, now we're going to be looking closely at those glands. And then if they ask you, where are those glands found? They are found in something called gastric pits. Gastric is another word for stomach, so they're found in gastric pits. Now, what do those glands that are in the stomach secrete? So they secrete three main types of material. They secrete mucus, they secrete gastric juices, and they secrete pepsinogen. Now let's take it one by one. If we're going to look at mucus, what does the mucus do? It has two roles usually. It's protection of the inner layer of the stomach from acidic environment, and also for lubrication. So always usually mucus is for lubrication, and it's also for protection from the acidic environment of the stomach. Then we have gastric juices. Now what is the main component of gastric juice? Is hydrochloric acid, which is HCl. Now HCl is a very strong acid. So an acid maintains a low pH. So its role, it maintains a low pH, which creates the acidic environment of the stomach. Now, why does the stomach have an acidic environment? We have two main reasons why our stomach should have an acidic environment. It's usually to kill any bacteria that comes in with the food. So for example, if we eat something that has some sort of bacteria cannot live in acidic environment. So the acidic environment of the stomach allows us to kill those bacteria. And another reason is it converts pepsinogen. Remember how we said the glands secrete pepsinogen? The acidic pH of the stomach helps the conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin. Now what is pepsinogen and what is pepsin? So pepsinogen is basically the inactive form of pepsin. As simple as it is. Pepsinogen, inactive form of pepsin. Now what is pepsin? Pepsin is a protease enzyme. Now, enzymes usually end in EAs. Okay, so it's a protease enzyme. Protein, think about it like that, split into two. Protease, so protein, and it's an enzyme. So it breaks down proteins into polypeptides. Okay, so you have a protein, that's the large molecule. So protein is made up of many polypeptides. Okay, and those polypeptides are made up of amino acids. Now, pepsin works here. Pepsin breaks proteins into polypeptides, and for pepsin to work, it needs an acidic pH. And now I also added a small note. So usually children do not have pepsin. As they grow older, they develop pepsin. They have another enzyme called renin, which is also a protease enzyme, and it helps the digestion of milk proteins. Now, as a result, so first we had in the mouth, let's just revise it very quickly. In the mouth, we had mechanical and chemical digestion, and then with the saliva, with the mucus, and with the enzyme amylase, we formed a food bolus, and then this food bolus was transported from the mouth into the esophagus. And remember, we said the epiglottis covers the larynx to allow the food to move from the pharynx to the esophagus, and the soft palate is pushed upward to prevent the entry of food particles into the nasal cavity. And then the food bolus in the esophagus is transported from the esophagus into the stomach through what method? Through peristalsis, which is the repetitive contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles. And remember, we said the muscles contract above the food and relax under the food. Okay? And then before we reach the stomach, we have a cardiac sphincter, which relaxes, allowing the food to enter, and then it contracts to prevent the acid from the stomach to go back into the esophagus. And then in the stomach, we said we also have mechanical and chemical digestion. We spoke about the structure of it, and we spoke about the secretions that occur, and the mixing of the hydrochloric acid, the mucus, and pepsin, and the food that we ate. They all form a material called chyme. What is chyme? Chyme is a semi-liquid, partially digested food with hydrochloric acid, which is HCl, and some digestive enzymes. Okay? And now this chyme, where's it going to enter? It's going to enter the small intestine. Perfect. However, before it enters the small intestine, there's another sphincter. So what did we notice? we notice that the stomach, this is the stomach, that is connected to the esophagus and to the small intestine by two sphincters. Here the first upper sphincter, the sphincter on top is called the cardiac sphincter, and then the sphincter at the bottom is called the pyloric sphincter. So the chyme should pass through the pyloric sphincter. It will relax, allowing the chyme to enter the small intestine. Now, what are the main functions of the small intestine? The small intestine completes the digestion. Remember, we said in the first video, we said digestion starts in the mouth and ends in the small intestine. And another function of the small intestine is when we start absorbing the food particles. So the small intestine is split into three main parts. We have the duodenum, and then the last part is called the ileum. Okay, this is the first part and this is the last part. You're not responsible for the middle part, but I added it in case. And the structure is also similar to the stomach and the rest of the digestive tract. We have an outermost layer, which is the serosa. We have a muscular layer. However, here we just have longitudinal and circular, so we don't have no oblique layer like in the stomach. And we have a submucosal layer, and our innermost layer is of course the mucosa. And again, it has cells that secrete mucus, enzymes, and other substances. And now we're going to be looking at those other substances and the enzymes that are released. So what is the role of the small intestine in digestion? So it receives chyme from the stomach and it enters the duodenum. Now remember, chyme is what is acidic. Okay? So pay attention to this, because now we're going to look at why it's important to know that it's acidic. So the duodenum receives acidic chyme. Now, high acidity, or we can say low pH, is bad for the intestine. Why? Probably because the enzymes that must work in the small intestine cannot function at a low pH. Okay, so we have different enzymes in the stomach and in the small intestine. So the environment should be different. So what happens for our enzymes in our intestine to work? We have to reduce this acidity. How do we reduce this acidity? Now the work of the accessory organs come in. So we have the duodenum receives secretions from the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. Remember, those are part of our accessory organs. Let's look at it one by one. What does the pancreas release? Pancreas releases pancreatic juice through what? Through the pancreatic duct. Okay, you have to know what it releases and how does it release it. It releases pancreatic juice through the pancreatic duct. Now, what's inside this pancreatic juice? We have digestive enzymes and we have sodium bicarbonate. So let's look first at sodium bicarbonate. So remember how we said the chyme is acidic, and we said high acidity is bad. So we have to counteract this acidic nature of chyme. So what do we add? We add a base. So sodium bicarbonate is what? As you guys guessed, is a weak base that is used to neutralize the acidic chyme. Why? Because a basic pH, so basic pH means a high pH, is needed for the digestive enzymes in the small intestine. And in addition, an acidic environment will affect the walls of the small intestine. So, which is the HCl and pepsin. So by adding a base, we increase the pH, so we neutralize this acid, and then pepsin will not work anymore in a basic environment. So it's going to protect the duodenum from the action of pepsin and from HCl. Okay, perfect. Now, other than the sodium bicarbonate that the pancreas release, they release also digestive enzymes. Now we're going to look at the digestive enzymes, and I need you guys to memorize them like your name. Okay, those are easy grades and they're very simple. So this is our substrate, okay, and then this is our product, and we followed the same structure down below. So if you have starch, What breaks down starch? Pancreatic amylase. So remember we had salivary amylase in the mouth, which breaks starch into maltose. Now we have another type of amylase, but this time it's released by the pancreas. So we call it pancreatic amylase, and it breaks down starch into maltose. Now we also have protein in our diet. What breaks protein? Trypsin this time. So watch out. Pepsin is in stomach. Okay? Trypsin is released by the pancreas into the small intestine. And what does it break down? It breaks down protein into smaller polypeptides. And now we have fats. Now we have to look at fats in a different way. So fats, or we can call them lipids, okay, are broken down by lipase. See, it's very simple. Lipids are broken down by lipase into fatty acids and glycerol. However, lipase cannot directly work on those lipids. Lipids are usually large molecules, insoluble, so we need to do something before. So what do? We need the help of bile. What is bile? Bile is a green, watery fluid, which is also alkaline, so it's basic. What does it also help to do? It neutralizes the acid, the acidic chyme also. Okay, this is also important. Now this bile is produced by what? It's produced by the liver, which is what? Another accessory organ. And it is stored where? In the gallbladder. So liver produces bile, then they store it where? In the gallbladder. And how is it transferred from the gallbladder into the intestine? By the bile duct. And remember, gallbladder is also an accessory organ. Now what does this bile do? So this bile contains something we call bile salts. Now what is the function of those bile salts? Their function is they help in the emulsification of fat. This is a very important keyword. Emulsifies the fat. What does that mean? It's first a form of mechanical digestion. So we're not chemically breaking down the lipids yet. We're physically breaking them. So it's a mechanical digestion. What does it do? Emulsification is basically the physical breakdown of fats to increase the surface area for lipase to work on. So for example, let's say this was a large lipid molecule, and then bile is released. Bile has bile salts. This will become into smaller molecules. So it breaks down a large molecule into smaller molecules. Now those molecules have larger surface area. Now they have a larger surface area, so what can work on them easily? Lipase. Oops, my bad. So lipase can start to work on them more easily, and then it breaks down the fats, or we can say lipids, into fatty acids and glycerol. Okay? That's perfect. And now, in addition to, pay attention, those were secretions by the pancreas, not by the small intestine. The pancreas secrete them into the small intestine, either by the pancreatic duct, which are the digestive enzymes and the sodium bicarbonate, and we secrete bile into the intestine by the bile duct. Now that doesn't mean the small intestine doesn't release anything. The small intestine does also release stuff. So it also have glands that secrete different enzymes. Now, other than the glands, a small note, they also have something called goblet cells. Those goblet cells, again, secrete mucus. Why does the intestine need mucus? As we said before, for protection, lubrication, and allows the movement of food in the intestine, also through peristalsis. So usually peristalsis is throughout our digestive tract to help. That's how food is being moved down. Okay, so other than the glands, we have something called goblet cells. Now we're talking in the intestine. The goblet cells secrete mucus for protection and lubrication to allow movement of food. Now, what are the enzymes, digestive enzymes, that the small intestine releases? This is also another table. You guys have to know it. Now, there's a small tip for you guys. Usually, enzymes are named based on their substrate. Okay? So, sucrose. So what's the enzyme going to be called? Sucrase. Enzymes usually end with ASE. ASE, 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 ASE. Okay? So they basically take the name of the substrate and they add ASE at the end. So sucrose, what breaks down sucrose? Sucrase. Now sucrose is made of what? Glucose and fructose. So when we break sucrose, we're going to receive glucose and fructose. You have to memorize those guys. Maltose, what's the enzyme? Maltase. It's going to break down maltose into 2 glucose molecules. Lactose, what's the enzyme for lactose? Lactase. What is lactase going to be broken down into? Going to be broken down into glucose and galactose. And we have 2 more, lipids. What's the enzyme going to be? Now look, it's going to be intestinal lipase. Why? Because it's released by the intestine. That's it. So lipids is going to be broken down to fatty acids and glycerol. And finally, we have polypeptides. Remember, polypeptides came from the stomach because we had pepsin to break down protein into polypeptides. And they came also from the intestine, but from what enzyme? From trypsin. And trypsin, as we said here, is released by the pancreas, and it breaks down protein into smaller polypeptides. And now all of those polypeptides accumulated together, so the intestine releases peptidase, which breaks down polypeptides into their amino acids. Now we completely digested all the food. So now digestion is over. We said digestion starts in the mouth and ends in the small intestine. So now we're done with all the digestion. Now after we digest the food, what do we have to do? We have to absorb the food, right? So now let's look how we absorb the nutrients. So we can absorb them in 2 main ways. So either active transport or passive transport. Active, of course, requires energy. Passive does not require energy. Now this depends on the type of nutrient we're absorbing, okay? Now, how do we absorb them, or where are they absorbed into? So there are 2 main forms. They can either be absorbed into the bloodstream directly or into lacules or lymphatic capillaries, okay? So usually water, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and sugars are absorbed directly into the bloodstream. However, fats are absorbed into lymphatic calories or lacules, okay? Usually fats are the ones that are absorbed here, okay? But everything else is usually directly absorbed into the bloodstream. Now, how can the small intestine absorb nutrients? Now, of course, if the small intestine wants to absorb nutrients, it must have a specific structure that allows it to absorb nutrients. And what are those specifications or structures that the small intestine has that allows it to absorb nutrients? So first of all, the small intestine has a very thin lining. It's only 1 cell thick. Imagine how thin it is. Why is that? So the nutrients can be easily accessed through the membrane and directly absorbed. If it was a very thick layer, so for example, if I had this layer, or if I had a very thick layer, of course nutrients will be able to pass through this more easily than having to pass through this. This is very thick, it's going to take more time. This is very thin, takes less time. So less time, and this will take more time. That's one of the specializations it has. Another thing, the small intestine is very long. It's called the small intestine because of its diameter, not because of its length. So it's a very long structure wrapped up upon itself. So it's very long. What does that help? It means we have plenty of time to absorb and digest. So we have time to digest the food, and we also have more time to absorb it. If it was a very short structure, we won't have time to digest, nor we would have time to absorb the food. That's why it is very long. And now what does the inner wall of the intestine has? It has finger-like projections called villi. And those villi, what do they have? They have also more smaller projections. We call them microvilli because they're smaller than the villi. And what is their role? Their role is they increase the surface area for absorption. Now this is the villus. I drew a small structure here. As you guys can see, this is the intestinal cell of the mucosa. That's the layer, okay? And then inside, what do we have? We have a capillary network, which is the red and the blue, and we have a lacteal, which is the green, okay? So the red, of course, are usually arteries, so arteriole, and the blue are the venules, and the green are the lymphatic vessel. However, inside, we're going to call them the capillary network and a lacteal. Now, what did we say is absorbed directly into the capillary network or the bloodstream? We said they're water, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and sugars. However, fats are directly absorbed into the lacteals, okay? This is basically a structure. You have to know the structure, so know the labeling of it also, know where the capillary network is found, where the lacteal is found, and what goes into the lacteal and what goes into the capillary network. And now finally, after the small intestine, where did we reach? We reached the large intestine. So food from the ileum, which was the last part of the small intestine, goes into the cecum, into the colon, and then the rectum. Now, the colon is usually the main organ in the large intestine. So what does it do? So additional water is absorbed. So maybe we didn't absorb all the water in the small intestine, so we have time also in the large intestine to absorb more water, and we also have some absorption of mineral salts and vitamins. Now also we have in fact bacteria that live inside our large intestine, and we call this bacterial flora. Now, not all bacteria are bad. Some bacteria are really beneficial for us. And this type of bacteria that lives in our large intestine is actually, in fact, beneficial for us. Why is it beneficial? Because it produces vitamin K for us, and vitamin K is important for blood clotting. It breaks undigestible food, and it also prevents pathogenic. Pathogenic means bacteria that cause disease, okay? So pathogens are agents that cause disease. So it also, the beneficial bacteria, or we call it good bacteria that lives in our large intestine, it prevents pathogenic bacteria from growing because they compete for resources. So it doesn't allow the pathogenic bacteria to grow and reproduce. Now, after we absorb the remaining water, mineral salts, and vitamins, we go into the rectum. Now, in the rectum, the feces contain what we said: undigested food, mucus, bacteria, bile pigments, and some water also. And those feces are ready to be ingested by the anus. Okay? And we talked about the components of the feces. And also a small note that mucus is also secreted in the large intestine to ease lubrication and facilitate movement throughout. Okay, before we look at the accessory organs, I will just quickly summarize what we talked about. So first we started in the mouth, where we had chemical plus mechanical digestion. Okay? Now, what was the enzyme for chemical digestion? It was amylase, and it breaks down starch into maltose. And then we moved to the esophagus. Remember here, we formed a food bolus. Now this food bolus serves as a stimulus for peristalsis to occur, which is allows the movement of the food bolus throughout the esophagus into the stomach. And then in the stomach, we also have mechanical, I'm gonna call it MD, mechanical digestion, and CD as chemical digestion. So chemical digestion was of proteins, as we had the enzyme pepsin, which broke down proteins into polypeptides. And remember, in the stomach, we had an acidic pH. After the stomach, we have the small intestine, where we had also more digestion and absorption. And then finally, we reached the large intestine, where we also had some absorption of water and minerals and vitamins. And it's where we're ready to excrete or ingest the undigested food, the remaining mucus, the bacteria, the bile pigment, and some water outside our body. Okay? If you have any questions about this part, make sure to leave a comment so I can explain it further for you guys. And now we're going to be looking again at the accessory organs, but it's going to be very brief because we mentioned them earlier and their role in digestion. So first we said salivary glands found in the mouth, and we have three main pairs, and they secrete saliva. Remember, saliva we said contains mucus, amylase. As we mentioned here, let me show it to you guys. We said saliva contains water, mucus, and amylase. Okay? After salivary glands, we have the pancreas. It secretes pancreatic juice, which contains the digestive enzymes and the sodium bicarbonate. It also secretes hormones, which are insulin and glucagon. And I'm sure you guys have heard them before, and they usually regulate blood glucose level. And the liver. Liver is a very important organ in our body. It's one of the largest organs, actually. And remember, we said it produces bile, and then the bile is stored in the gallbladder, which is also an accessory organ. And the liver also. The blood from the digestive tract passes to the liver through something called hepatic portal vein. Now, what's a portal vein? It's a vein that does not pass through the heart first. So the blood from the digestive tract passes to the liver through the hepatic portal vein before passing through the heart. It also functions in detoxification, and remember, the liver stores excess glucose as glycogen, and it also synthesizes proteins for blood clotting, and also it works in the deamination of amino acids. Now let's look also finally at some diseases that might occur in our digestive system. So we have three main common diseases. We have diarrhea, cholera, and salmonella. Okay? So diarrhea is usually the discharge of watery feces. The reason behind it is reduced water absorption. So if we're not absorbing water, our feces are going to be watery. So reduced water absorption in the large intestine, and it usually leads to dehydration and salt loss. So what's the treatment for it? It's very simple. Oral rehydration therapy, or we call it ORT. And it's just to administer a dilute solution of sugar and salts dissolved in water to restore all the water that we lost and all the salt and sugars that we are losing. Another common disease is cholera. Now, cholera usually occurs in poor areas because they don't have a clean water source. They have a contaminated water source. That's where bacteria usually grow. So the reason behind cholera is caused by a bacterium called Vibrio cholerae. And the steps of infection, how does it occur? So cholera infects the intestine and it releases a toxin. Now this toxin leads to the increased secretion of chloride ions. Now we will have an increase in concentration of chloride ions in the lumen of the intestine. So there are going to be a lower water potential than blood capillaries. And now remember, what will happen if we have a lower water potential than blood capillaries? Water will leave the blood capillaries and enter the lumen of the intestine. Why? Because in osmosis, water travels from high water potential to lower water potential. So when the water leaves the blood capillaries and enters the lumen of the intestine, we're going to have a loss of water and salts and feces through diarrhea again. So one of the symptoms of cholera is diarrhea. What is the treatment? Again, oral rehydration therapy to restore everything we lost, and also antibiotics to target the bacteria. And usually it spreads out, we said, through contaminated water and or food, or it could be food polluted with human feces that has the bacteria. And finally, we have salmonella, which is one of the symptoms of salmonella is also diarrhea. And what is the reason of it? It's the ingestion of contaminated food products, and usually it's in eggs. That's why people tell you to not eat a large amount of raw eggs. It's better to stay away from anything raw because it can contain salmonella. And how does the infection occur? So it's a bacteria. Salmonella bacteria invades the intestinal mucosa. It replicates over there, causes inflammation, and eventually will lead to diarrhea. And it can also lead to the inflammation of the stomach. So it spreads throughout our body. An example would be Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid fever, which is usually high fever, headache, and fatigue. And this Salmonella typhus has the ability to spread to other organs of our body. Example, it could spread into our spleen also. That's it for the human digestive system. If you have any questions, make sure to ask them in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and best of luck. Thank you so much.